flips and kicks and punches, and, you'd be punching this bag, for hour after hour, and, your knuckles would be broken with bloody vessels, and you just thought, yeah, that's so hot.
Something about this photo just feels off, and once it clicks, it's impossible to unsee. At first glance, everything looks perfectly normal. Classic action, flawless styling, that signature energy from Charlie's Angels that fans have loved for years.
We, showed that we're not using guns, that we're very capable as women, and we can take care of ourselves.
We're going sort of beyond reality, and some of the stuff we're also wanting to keep it grounded to show that we could actually, that these girls were actually capable of doing this.
But look closer, because hidden right there in plain sight is a blooper so subtle that even the fans completely missed it. That's exactly what makes this so fascinating. Once you spot it, it raises even bigger questions about what else might be hiding in scenes everyone thought were perfect. Stick around to discover hidden details you'll wish you noticed sooner. This photo is not edited. Look closer at the Charlie's Angels blooper. A photograph from the 2000 film contains a peculiar inconsistency that rewards close attention in a way that most casual viewings would never prompt. At first glance, everything about the image looks entirely ordinary, the kind of framing that appears in countless films without attracting any particular scrutiny. The photograph shows Knox's father with an arm positioned around Charlie in one frame, creating a composition that reads as natural and unremarkable, exactly the kind of casual image that might appear in a family album or a social gathering. Nothing about that initial impression suggests anything unusual is happening. But then, the same sequence presents another shot, and in that shot, the arms appear above the head rather than around Charlie, contradicting what the previous frame had established. That shift, small as it sounds when described plainly, creates a genuine puzzle once noticed, because a single continuous moment in a film cannot show two different physical positions at the same time without something having gone wrong somewhere in the process of assembling the scene. And the fact that so many people watched this film across multiple viewings without ever registering the inconsistency makes the discovery feel even more remarkable. The error appears during a moment in the film that carries genuine narrative weight, which makes the oversight both more understandable and more fascinating in equal measure. This is the pivotal sequence where the Angels begin to understand that Knox is actually targeting Charlie, a realization that shifts the entire direction of the story and changes what has been understood about the threat facing the people at the center of the film. Dylan recalls a photograph, and the camera moves in on the name Townsend in a deliberate, tension-building progression designed to guide attention toward the truth behind Knox's intentions and the connection that had previously gone unrecognized. At the timestamp 1 hour 5 seconds, the inconsistency sits quietly in plain sight, while everything else about the scene is working hard to direct focus elsewhere. The shot immediately before the final photograph frame clearly shows Knox's father's arm wrapped around Charlie in the position that establishes the composition, while all other shots within that same sequence show the arms raised overhead instead. How that contradiction made it through the editing process without being flagged is a question that does not have a simple answer. But the most likely explanation involves the way attention naturally behaves during scenes carrying significant emotional and narrative momentum. The discovery of this particular mistake did not come through an official production acknowledgement or any kind of deliberate transparency from the filmmakers. Instead, sharp-eyed viewers doing exactly what devoted film fans tend to do, returning to scenes that matter to them, pausing at specific moments, and asking whether everything actually lines up the way it appears to, eventually cataloged the error on MovieMistakes.com, a platform where film enthusiasts document continuity errors with enough precision that others can verify the findings for themselves. Specific timestamps make the process straightforward, and the community built around that kind of close watching has become a repository for errors that might otherwise remain obscure indefinitely. What this discovery process really highlights is the depth of attention that exists within film audiences, a depth that major productions sometimes underestimate when assuming that the pace of a scene will carry viewers past any inconsistencies hiding in peripheral details. The existence of entire databases dedicated to tracking these moments across thousands of films suggests that the impulse to look closely, to ask whether everything checks out, and to share findings with others who care equally is far more widespread than casual assumptions about passive viewership would suggest. The rapid pacing of action sequences naturally works against the kind of careful frame-by-frame observation that would be required to catch subtle position changes between shots in real time. Editors working with hundreds of takes from multiple camera angles face the challenge of assembling the best available footage into a coherent and emotionally effective sequence. And during that process, small physical inconsistencies between different takes can slip through without triggering alarm bells, especially when every other element of the assembled scene is functioning exactly as intended. This particular error survived largely because the emotional content of the moment successfully commanded all available attention. When the camera moves toward the name Townsend, and the significance of the connection between Knox and Charlie begins to register, the mind locks onto that revelation and follows it forward. The question of where someone's arms are positioned in a photograph becomes genuinely irrelevant to anything the scene is trying to accomplish, which is precisely why such details can hide in plain sight for years. The stronger and more engaging the storytelling becomes, the easier it is to overlook the smallest details, almost like the scene quietly asks for full attention while something subtle slips by unnoticed. And that is exactly what happened here, where a tiny mistake stayed hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone curious enough to catch it. But what really happened behind the camera makes this even more interesting, so stay glued till the very end. The Charlie's Angels Legacy, created by Ivan Goff and Ben Roberts, the original Charlie's Angels television series premiered on March 21, 1976, and almost immediately, something about the show felt different from everything else on primetime television at the time. The 72-minute pilot film drew a 54% share in the Nielsen ratings, which meant that more than half of all television sets in use that night were tuned in to watch three women chase down criminals and solve cases for a mysterious boss whose face nobody ever got to see. ABC executives had serious doubts about the concept from the beginning, and those doubts ran deep enough that after the initial broadcast, the pilot was re-aired just 1 week later in an attempt to verify whether those numbers were accurate. And the repeat ratings came back equally impressive, which forced even the most skeptical executives to accept that something genuinely special had arrived on screens across the country. Kate Jackson, Farrah Fawcett, and Jacqueline Smith starred as the original Angels. Three women working for the mysterious Charlie Townsend's detective agency, and the energy that all three brought to the roles felt fresh in a way that audiences had not quite experienced before in that format. The series became a top 10 hit in the Nielsen ratings for its first 2 seasons, which was no small achievement during a period when competition for primetime audiences was fierce and the television landscape was shifting in ways that made it hard to predict what would actually connect. Critics at the time were quick to label the show as nothing more than so-called jiggle television, a dismissive phrase suggesting the appeal was entirely surface-level and built around physical appearance rather than substance. But that label always raised a quiet question, because was that criticism really a fair reading of what the show was doing? Or was it more of a reflection of discomfort, with the idea of three women taking command of roles that had traditionally been filled by men? because when attention moved past the surface, the series consistently presented three women who worked together as equals, earned their own money, made independent decisions, solved complex cases, and operated without needing anyone to rescue or guide them. That kind of representation carried real weight during a period shaped heavily by second-wave feminism, a time when conversations about women's independence, professional equality, and personal autonomy were happening everywhere, from university campuses to kitchen tables across the country. Jaclyn Smith, who remained the only angel to appear across all 5 seasons of the original run, later reflected on what the series meant during that cultural moment, saying that the show felt groundbreaking because of the way it portrayed 3 emotionally and financially independent women. And that kind of portrayal made many audiences feel seen in ways that went beyond simple entertainment. The commercial success of the show extended far beyond television ratings because the impact reached into everyday life through merchandise that seemed to appear almost everywhere a person could look. Dolls, board games, trading cards, beauty products, lunchboxes, and posters spread across markets in the United States, the United Kingdom, and international territories, turning the Angels into something that lived well outside the television set. That kind of reach raised an interesting thought about what drives a show from the screen into the daily routines of audiences, and the answer seemed to sit in the strength of the connection that formed between viewers and the characters. When a connection like that takes hold, people want something physical to hold on to as a reminder of that feeling, and the merchandise gave exactly that. After the show ended in 1981, the interest did not simply disappear the way some canceled series tend to fade out quietly. Syndication kept the episodes circulating, and later DVD releases brought the show to entirely new audiences who had not been watching in 1976. A genuine cult following formed over the years, made up of original viewers who never stopped caring and newer audiences discovering the show for the first time. That kind of staying power showed that some stories do not really end when the final episode airs, but instead continue living in the memories and collections of those who first connected with them. The franchise returned to screens in 2000 with a full film adaptation, and this time the cast brought in Cameron Diaz, Drew Barrymore, and Lucy Liu as a new generation of angels, taking on cases with even more physical intensity than the original series had managed with its television budget and schedule. The shift from weekly episodic television to a feature film format opened up possibilities for bigger action sequences, more elaborate stunts, and a kind of visual energy that the original show could never quite achieve. And audience response confirmed that the core idea still held real value, because the 2000 film connected strongly enough to justify a sequel, with Charlie's Angels Full Throttle arriving in 2003 and the 2 films together grossing a combined total of $596 million against a combined budget of $261 million. Those numbers made a fairly clear argument that the Angels had successfully crossed from one era into another without losing the fundamental appeal that made the original series work. Television tried to bring the concept back in 2011 with a reboot that aimed to introduce a fresh cast and a contemporary setting, but the results told a completely different story. The series was canceled after just 4 episodes aired, which raised an obvious question about why some revivals managed to capture what made the original special, while others struggled to hold attention even through a single season. Timing, casting, tone, and the specific cultural moment a revival arrives in all seem to play a role, but pinning down exactly which combination of factors determines success or failure is harder than it might initially appear. Another attempt came in 2019 when Elizabeth Banks directed a new film adaptation starring Kristen Stewart, Naomi Scott, and Ella Balinska. bringing the franchise into a moment when conversations about gender representation in action films had become louder and more prominent than at almost any previous point in the industry. But despite the timing and the talent involved, the film grossed just over $73 million globally and received reviews that described mixed feelings from critics and audiences alike. That outcome kept the same lingering question alive, the one about what exactly allows a version of Charlie's Angels to form a deep emotional connection with audiences, because the formula might look straightforward from the outside, but clearly requires something very specific that is not easy to manufacture or recreate on demand. Bloopers occupy an interesting and often underestimated place in how audiences relate to the films and television shows that matter most to them. At first glance, a blooper is simply a mistake, a flubbed line, an unexpected stumble, a laugh breaking through at the wrong moment. But a closer look at what actually happens when audiences encounter those moments reveals something far more meaningful than a simple error on screen. When an actor breaks character, laughs at an unexpected moment, or reacts genuinely to something that was not planned, something shifts in how the entire viewing experience feels. Celebrities and performers often exist at a comfortable distance from everyday life, appearing polished and untouchable in their finished work, existing in a space that feels removed from the ordinary world most people inhabit. Bloopers quietly and efficiently break that distance because a genuine laugh or a stumbled line makes clear that the person on screen is not fundamentally different from anyone watching. That shift in perception matters more than it might seem because it creates the conditions for a much stronger emotional bond to form. There is a neurological dimension to this as well, because when audiences observe authentic human reactions, mirror neurons activate in the brain, triggering a form of empathy and shared emotional response. That neural mirroring contributes to the release of serotonin, dopamine, and endorphins, creating positive psychological experiences that become associated with both the performer and the production. The practical effect of all this is that a blooper reel can deepen attachment to a film or series in ways that polished promotional material rarely achieves, because the connection formed through witnessing a real, unguarded moment carries a kind of authenticity that carefully crafted content simply cannot replicate. For a franchise like Charlie's Angels, where so much of the appeal has always rested on the chemistry between the leads and the sense that audiences are watching people who genuinely enjoy working together, bloopers become even more valuable. A moment where Drew Barrymore, Cameron Diaz, and Lucy Liu dissolve into laughter together reinforces exactly the kind of authentic connection that made audiences invest in the films in the first place. And that raises a surprisingly interesting thought, one that tends to linger a little longer than expected, because maybe these bloopers are not just mistakes interrupting a film, but something more revealing. What if they are extensions of the experience itself, small moments where the curtain slips just enough to expose the reality behind the illusion? It makes the next reveal even more intriguing. So stay right here and look closer, because this one changes everything. Behind the scenes of the blooper. Principal photography on Charlie's Angels began in January 2000, and from the outset, the production operated at a pace and scale that made precision a constant challenge, even when everyone involved was doing everything right. Filming spread across locations throughout Southern California, with the production team managing complex action sequences that required careful coordination between cast members, stunt performers, camera operators, and crew across multiple settings that changed regularly throughout the shooting schedule. The physical demands placed on the cast during this period were substantial enough that cast members described training schedules that left little room for recovery. Lucy Liu later recalled that preparation for the fight sequences involved training 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. A commitment that speaks to the ambition behind the choreography and the standard that the production had set for how the action needed to look on screen. A schedule like that creates cumulative fatigue over weeks of shooting, and cumulative fatigue is exactly the kind of condition under which continuity details can begin to slip past the people whose job it is to catch them. The locations added their own layers of logistical complexity. The house used for the sequence involving Drew Barrymore's character was the same residence that had appeared in E.T. the Extraterrestrial, a detail that might sound charming in retrospect, but presented practical coordination challenges during production. Filming in a location already associated with another iconic piece of cinema brought its own pressures, and managing camera setups, equipment placement, and continuity in a space with an established visual identity required careful planning that added to an already demanding workload. Throughout all of this, the directing approach set the overall temperature of the production. McGee's style emphasized energy, boldness, and a constant push toward intensity, and that atmosphere shaped every aspect of how the filming days unfolded. Cameron Diaz described an environment where the director's level of enthusiasm never dropped, and his excitement and energy functioned as the driving force moving everyone through the work. High-energy direction produces performances with genuine life in them, but it also creates conditions where the pace of moving from setup to setup can outrun the capacity to check every small detail before committing to the next shot. The on-set dynamics during production introduced additional complications that had nothing to do with the physical demands of the action sequences. A production assistant who worked on the film described moments of significant confusion that arose when Bill Murray began rewriting scenes without consulting the director or fellow producers, placing new pages in trailers and creating disruption across the stage as cast and crew found themselves facing material that differed from what had been prepared and planned. Walking onto a set expecting one version of a scene and finding something entirely different, waiting, is exactly the kind of situation that pulls collective focus away from the details that continuity depends on. When Lucy Liu raised questions about this approach and what it meant for how the work was being handled, tensions escalated in a way that required assistant directors to clear the stage entirely. That kind of interruption represents a significant disruption to the focused environment that careful filmmaking requires, and in the aftermath of such a moment, the mental energy available for tracking small physical details across multiple takes becomes a much scarcer resource than it would have been otherwise. Conflict on set does not just affect morale, it actively redirects attention in ways that make small mistakes harder to catch and easier to carry forward into the final cut. McGee's vision for the film centered on a specific kind of physicality and presence for the angels, a combination of dexterity, effectiveness, and what was described as panache, the ability to move through any situation with confidence and style intact. That vision drove a perfectionist approach to the action sequences that pushed cast members consistently beyond their comfort zones, always looking for the take that captured exactly the quality of movement and energy the director was after. Drew Barrymore credited that directorial approach with driving everyone to be tougher and smarter than they might have pushed themselves to be independently, and the belief McGee placed in the team created a genuine atmosphere of collective ambition. Bill Murray, observing the process from close range, noted that McGee demonstrated an ability to recite the entire film shot for shot from memory, which illustrated just how complete and detailed the director's internal map of the project was. That level of involvement in the overall vision is impressive, and it shows in the finished product. But even the most complete internal vision of a film, no matter how carefully planned or brilliantly executed, cannot guarantee that every tiny inconsistency across hundreds of takes will be caught before a scene is locked and left behind. Think about it for a second. With so many moving parts, fast action, and endless retakes, is it really surprising that a few slip through unnoticed? And that is exactly where things start to get interesting. Because once you begin to look a little closer, those small details suddenly become impossible to ignore. Up next, some of the most surprising moments you probably missed. Stay right here till the very end. Other Charlie's Angels bloopers you might have missed. Beyond the photograph inconsistency that earned its own careful analysis, multiple other mistakes found their way into the final cuts of Charlie's Angels. And Charlie's Angels, Full Throttle, each one telling a small story about the conditions under which major productions are assembled, and the near impossibility of achieving complete continuity across a complex shoot. Lucy Liu's footwear provided one of the more jarring examples, because during a sequence where climbing a rope up castle walls required flat shoes for grip and practicality, the scene then cut almost immediately to a fight taking place in 4-inch heels. That transformation happened between shots that were meant to represent a continuous sequence of events, and the sudden change created exactly the kind of disconnect that careful continuity work is designed to prevent. How a shift that dramatic pass-through editing without triggering a correction raises genuine questions about how attention gets distributed during post-production on a film with as many moving parts as this one had. Drew Barrymore's face told a similar story of continuity breaking down at a critical moment. Following the headquarters explosion at the 59-minute and 20-second mark, clear soot coverage showed the physical impact of the blast in a way that made visual sense within the scene. But the final shot of that same sequence presented a completely clean face, as though the explosion had left no trace at all. For anyone watching carefully, the before and after created a small but visible inconsistency that disrupted the otherwise seamless logic of the action. The helicopter sequence, at the 1 hour, 20-minute, and 35-second mark, introduced another puzzling disappearance, as the rope and clamps used for climbing appeared clearly in close-up shots and then vanished entirely in the shots that followed. Props essential to the physical action of a scene do not simply go missing between setups without someone noticing. Yet here the finished film preserved exactly that absence. And at the 1 hour, 15-minute, and 25-second mark, the direction of Liu's spinning reversed between close-up and wide shots, creating a physical impossibility in what was meant to be a single unbroken movement. Cameron Diaz's real-life wardrobe situation at the Full Throttle premiere in 2003 produced a moment that required quick adaptation when a shoe broke just before the red carpet walk, resulting in a barefoot arrival alongside co-stars that became one of the more memorable unplanned moments connected to the franchise. Inside the film, Natalie's white chamber outfit created its own continuity puzzle when the hood and oxygen mouthpiece that were clearly present upon entering the room had disappeared entirely by the time gymnastic flips began at the 39-minute and 50-second mark. Saran wrap appeared on a blowfish dish between shots at the 19-minute and 25-second mark without any explanation for how or why it arrived there. A small but visible break in the continuity of a scene that presumably went through multiple viewing passes before reaching its final form. The F1 racing cars presented an even more striking oversight at the 31-minute and 50-second mark, moving through active traffic without any visible drivers inside the vehicles. Whether this represents a failure of visual effects, work to fill in what should have been present, or simply an oversight in how the sequence was assembled, the finished result left cars traveling at speed through a busy environment with nobody visibly at the controls. The plot of the film assigned specific significance to a pygmy nuthatch, making the bird's identity a detail with actual narrative relevance rather than simple background decoration. Yet, At the 1 hour, 2 minute and 50-second mark, an aureole appeared in place of the species that the story had established as meaningful. For most viewers, the distinction between bird species is not the kind of thing that registers without prompting, which is likely why this substitution made it to the final cut. But for anyone paying close enough attention to notice, the mismatch between what the story called for and what actually appeared on screen created a clear disconnect that no amount of pacing or emotional engagement could fully smooth over. At the 33-minute mark, as the camera zoomed out from a television screen, a cameraman's reflection appeared clearly in the screen itself, breaking the invisible wall that separates the world inside a film from the process of making it. Reflective surfaces have been the source of crew visibility mistakes across countless productions, because what the camera captures in a reflection is not always apparent until footage is reviewed, and sometimes not even then, if attention during review is focused elsewhere. This particular reflection survived all the way to the finished film, which suggests that either the review process did not catch what the screen was reflecting, or that by the time it was noticed, replacing the shot was judged to present more difficulty than leaving the mistake in place. The alley fight at the 25-minute and 28-second mark introduced another break in the constructed reality of the film when the stage ceiling became visible in the frame. A finished film is meant to present its world as complete and self-contained, and visible evidence of the physical structure housing the set punctures that illusion in a way that cannot be undone once noticed. Stage ceilings appearing in fight sequences typically result from camera angles that push just slightly higher than the set was designed to accommodate, a small miscalculation that can be difficult to predict until the footage comes back and reveals exactly where the limits of the constructed environment were. All of these details together created a picture of a production that was ambitious, energetic, and working at a scale and pace that made genuine perfection an unachievable target. None of these mistakes diminished the entertainment value that made both films connect with audiences or undercut the performances at the center of the work. But each one served as a quiet reminder that filmmaking is a fundamentally human process, assembled from hundreds of decisions made under pressure, and that even when the finished product looks seamless from a comfortable distance, a closer look almost always finds traces of the effort, the complexity, and the occasional oversight that went into making it. With this, we have come to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, do well to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. To enjoy more thrilling stories, click now on the following video that pops up on your screen.